These were crucial defenses to the harbor of Portland.
The fort's falling apart.
Now, Fox 23 News presents Saving Fort Gorges, sponsored by the Porthole Restaurant.
Good evening, I'm Charlie Lopresti, and welcome to Fort Gorges. During the course of the next half hour, we're going to examine inside this unique structure, take a closer look at the state it is in, and the efforts on multiple fronts to fix it. But first, let's start with the big picture.
People always notice it out there, but they're not sure what it is or why it's there.
This is Fort Gorges, an abandoned military site sitting on Hog Island in the middle of Casco Bay. Covering an acre and a half, it is one of the most noticeable structures in all of Portland Harbor.
Been all up and down the coast, and it's one of a kind.
It began as a plan to strengthen the coastline, but more than 150 years later, the fort is in disrepair. Its archways cracking, weather and vandals taking a visible toll. Now, a new push to protect this piece of Portland history.
If we can repair it structurally, then future generations can continue to enjoy it as we have.
And that's what brings us out here today. The effort to save the fort is underway. It could take significant steps in the coming year, but before we get to what's ahead, let's take a look back at where it started. Jared Pelletier takes a look at the construction more than 150 years ago.
Historian Ken Thompson says Fort Gorges is special. He realized it the very first time he stepped inside.
First time was 1960 when I was 14. This whole parade ground was full of trees. It was just totally overgrown, and it was kind of neat.
He hit the history books to understand how it all started.
In 1826, the Fortification Board proposed various forts all around the country.
They were built primarily in order of where they were needed most. Fort Gorges wasn't a priority for quite a while.
They decided to draw plans. In 1861, they actually started constructing the fort.
Its location was strategic, its design state-of-the-art.
They finally figured out how to disperse the smoke that's generated in these enclosed casemates.
Thanks to this ventilation system, soldiers didn't have to worry about being overcome by smoke while firing in these protected spaces.
And then you also could have multiple tiers. So instead of having 15 guns, you could have 15, 15, and 15.
Each on a track system that helped with aiming.
The original ones down here were 42-pounders, would have been 42-pounders, a mile-and-a-half range.
Plus some heavier artillery up top, like this rifle that still sits here.
13 tons, 26,000 pounds. It would have a 3 to 4 mile effective range.
Lots of firepower behind a strong enclosed structure. But there was a problem. By the time the money started rolling in to finish the work here, the science behind the fort became obsolete. Before it was nearly complete in 1865, potential enemies developed stronger guns of their own, which would help enemies hit the fort with more accuracy.
They spent a little bit more money until 1870, and they finally threw in the towel.
The fort is truly like a window into the past, giving us a clear look at military science at the time. At Fort Gorges, Jared Pelletier reported.
A group of engineers, architects, and supporters of the fort have come together to form a group called Friends of Fort Gorges. They are stewards of the site. As Adam Epstein shows us, their goal is to create a master plan to fix it.
Every day, through sun and fog, this flag flies at Fort Gorges. It was the first effort more than 10 years ago by the group Friends of Fort Gorges. Their goal now is on a much bigger scale.
The fort's falling apart.
For the last year, Executive Director Paul Dreenan and the rest of the Friends group have been working on a plan to save Fort Gorges.
If we don't start this process now, it might get boarded up in another 10 years.
They've teamed up with engineers and architects to create a master plan.
The scope of the project is so huge that we can't really even begin.
Just what that plan will look like depends a lot on money. The price tag for this could reach up to $250,000.
In a perfect world, we would love to restore the fort to its original grandeur with, the officers' quarters intact and the one Parrott rifle that's remaining out there restored and set in place. But realistically, we really just hope to repair the fort structurally.
Ideas for future work at the fort will need to come from the community.
How far do we take the restoration process? How nice do we make it? How raw do we leave it?
Friends of Fort Gorges hopes to hold a series of public forums next year, giving you a chance to weigh in on the future of Casco Bay's most iconic landmark. In Portland, I'm Adam Epstein.
Restoring the fort is a big undertaking, and there are several layers to it. The most obvious is safety. The City of Portland says the Army Corps of Engineers will help with some of the work, but the real work takes a lot of planning, and that falls to a team of people. We met with structural engineer Al Hodson to talk about what needs to be done to fix it and why.
It's going to be really a three-part effort. It's going to be protecting people, their own safety, protecting the fort from people, and vandals in particular, and protecting the fort from the elements.
From a weather perspective, what's our biggest enemy? Is it rain? Is it snow? Is it ice? I mean, what's happening here at the fort?
It's water in all forms. Primarily, the biggest culprit would be ice. But it's not only water, it's also the combination of water and sun.
So this structure is weakening day by day, year by year.
Yes.
And you can see the weakening as we move inside the fort to the officers' quarters.
You can see roots of some of the plants that have been growing through some of the vent systems. One thing we also can see, unfortunately, is the effects of visitors. One of the things that we're going to have to do is protect the fort from vandalism in the future.
But underneath the vandalism is a glimpse into the craftsmanship we rarely see anymore.
It provides us with a really exquisite laboratory to see the construction techniques and the construction methods that were used during the 1840s to 1860s.
And you can see even better examples as we head upstairs. Let's check it out. I see all the detail that goes into even just the ceiling right here, and I don't feel like I'm in a fort.
Right. It really was somewhat high living for rustic conditions that they had. You can see the remnants of the wooden framing and the beautiful arched carpentry work that was performed.
But signs of decay are also more evident on the second floor.
And one of the things that's a safety concern for people visiting the fort, you have a rotted floor here. They could really hurt themselves in one of these areas, one of these large gaps.
Just one of the many areas where a restoration project would benefit the fort. Coming up, there's a second option for getting out here.
I've gone to this fort so many times in the last 3 years, and I haven't found a bad day yet.
We tag along with Portland Paddle, how they're introducing a new generation to an old landmark.
That was the stopper in the bottle.
Last line of defense, the strategic placement of this fort, and two other locations that depend on it. Plus, Island born, the Maine family with a special connection to Fort Gorges.
You're watching Fox 23's Saving Fort Gorges, sponsored by the Porthole Restaurant.
Welcome back. We move now to the top of the fort where you can see the vegetation is a little out of control, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, when the fort was first built, the top was another angle to fire off rifles and defend the harbor. It was filled in with dirt around 1865, put here as a protection measure. Over time, all these plants started growing, and it became what you recognize today. From up here, there's a fantastic view of the Portland skyline, and you can easily see boats coming and going from miles away, and that includes an active kayaking community. Paddling is one of the easiest ways to get to Fort Gorges, and as Amanda Jellig discovered, Portland Paddle is the only local group that offers specific tours to the island.
It's 9:30 in the morning. The waters off East End Beach are clear and calm.
This morning we've got 10 people going out, pretty good sized group.
Portland Paddle is taking us to Fort Gorges. It's just one of several trips they make to the fort every week.
It's been one of our most popular tours for sure.
It's our first time to the fort, and the first for many others in our group as well.
It's really cool how many Portland locals that we get that have been like, I've been living here for 40 years and I've never been out to the fort.
This is one of Master Guide Scott Anker's favorite tours.
That is one of the most special places in the coast of Maine as far as I'm concerned.
The fort fort is a little more than a mile from shore. The paddle takes us about a half an hour.
I've gone to this fort so many times in the last 3 years, and I haven't found a bad day yet.
As you get closer, you realize just how large the fort really is.
Wow. It's consistently, wow. And then some people, particularly local people, say, wow, I never knew this was here. And when you get it up and you see the structure of it, see, that's right out here in the middle of Casco Bay.
Oh, this is so cool.
People just can't believe the beauty of it. And it really is a magical place.
A place Portland Paddle and its customers hope to explore for years to come. On Casco Bay, I'm Amanda Jellig.
Amanda and our photographer Philip had a great time on that trip. Well, from up here, you also get a great view of this odd addition to the fort, this giant concrete slab. This was not original to the fort. A large storage building was actually added after and used to house materials to protect the harbor during the Spanish-American War, and perhaps most notably during World War II, when German U-boats were said to be in Casco Bay. It's one of the only times the fort was actually used in a military capacity. But that, of course, wasn't the plan when the fort was built more than 150 years ago. This fort was meant to be the last line of defense in a series of forts guarding the entrance to Portland Harbor. Greg Lagerquist takes a look at why this is one of the most important harbors on the entire East Coast.
Well, we're standing in Old Fort Preble.
Herb Adams has spent much of his life studying Maine's history, including its maritime history.
These were crucial defenses to the harbor of Portland, a very busy deep-water harbor then, didn't
we? Met him at Fort Preble, now on the campus of SMCC in South Portland, across the channel from the remains of Fort Scammell on House Island, which forms a triangle with Fort Gorges on Hog Island Ledge.
And this was meant to be a package deal when they were started in 1858 when they began that.
Mm-hmm.
We had this fort here with the other forts, as you were saying, around the harbor, and that was meant to sort of be a capstone to it in a sense.
That was the stopper in the bottle. It would have been very hard for you to get past Portland Headlight and then thread the needle between these two forts, because it's less than 3/4 of a mile really between us, and then to manage to hook around and get into the harbor would have been very hard for any ocean-going vessel, even those under steam, and certainly almost impossible for those under sail. Fort Gorges was considered what was referred to in the building of it as a third system fort. First system meant forts like this, they were on the land. Second system might have been out on the harbor islands. Third system, often they sat in the water all alone, like Fort Gorges does there.
And in the first half of the 19th century, there were few areas more worthy of such a system of forts than Portland.
It's one day closer to Europe by sail than any other port conveniently available, and doesn't freeze in the winter. We're protected by all these islands. So we had a real lock upon the maritime trades. Much of Portland, most of it, was in some way engaged in or made money from the maritime trades. Our customs house, that is the place where you paid taxes on goods you imported by sea, was among the 5 busiest in all the east of the United States. Times of the year when it would be second and third busiest. Imagine that, down on our Portland waterfront. So, of course you defend a port like that.
Now it's these old forts that need defending and remembering and preserving. A legacy in stone, no longer guarding our present, but our past. At Fort Preble, I'm Greg Lagerquist reporting.
From up here, you also get a pretty good vantage point of 2 floors of casemates. They're pretty incredible to see, and one of the key areas the Friends of Fort Gorges hopes to address and fix.
Each one of these casements was intended to hold a cannon. This one here would have been aimed right over toward the Western Prom.
I feel like I'm in the late 1800s, but then you see a giant cruise ship.
Yeah. So Charlie, as we're walking along here, in this particular casemate, we can see where one of the arch stones has really dropped dramatically.
How would you stabilize something like this?
Well, something like that, you can work shims in between the stones to help it catch. There'll be some mortar work done in there. Here we can see some of the effects of the water damage. You can start to see where there's some cracking occurring in the masonry. I think it's starting to hit a point in its life cycle that the deterioration that's happening is going to pick up at a much more rapid pace.
So something needs to be done soon, or else.
Yes. or else it won't be as safe for the public, and we won't be able to preserve it for future generations.
At the end of this row of casemates is an area that not many people get to see, the powder magazine rooms. They're large storage areas for ammunitions, and we got to go inside.
Watch your step in here, folks. Very uneven footing.
This reminds me of a fallout shelter. Inside these massive cavernous rooms, the military would have stored torpedoes or mines that would have been placed in the harbor for protection. Now you can see the damage from the elements. Water has seeped into the rooms, causing large pieces of granite to fall. Just what will happen to these rooms is still in question. We're told they may end up blocked off for safety purposes. That will all be part of the master plan as well. Coming up, born on Fort Gorges.
Well, the fort that you never leave, it never left her soul.
One family's unique ties to the island and the special way they hope a restoration project could honor their grandmother, and looking for answers. Why the city says it can't do anything to save the fort right now, and who they're turning to instead.
You're watching Fox 23's Saving Fort Gorges, sponsored by the Porthole Restaurant.
Welcome back. We're inside the officers' quarters now, and it's hard to believe anyone living on the fort like it is right now. But in its prime, the fort's caretaker and his family lived here full time. That includes a little girl. Jana Barnello shows us how that little girl's family has been trying to save the fort since the late 1800s.
For us, Fort Gorges represents protection and history. For a select few, the fort means family.
It's hard to get there, but we all manage because it's kind of like going to visit Nana.
Beverly Dow and Vicki DeVoe's grandma took them to see this view and the fort when they were kids.
Well, the fort, you never leave. It never left her soul.
On July 8th, 1904, Lyda Dahl became one of only 2 people ever born on Fort Gorges.
She talked about it probably almost every day, every week.
Dahl's grandpa was the fort's caretaker. She lived there with her grandparents until 1916.
It was something that she felt proud of because of that one thing.
It's hard for her granddaughters to see what's happened to the fort. It was hard for Dahl to see as well. In an interview with the Portland Evening Express from the 1960s, Dahl described a luxurious life at the fort. Hardwood floors, huge fireplaces, Sunday dinners with 50 people from the nearby islands. We grew fruit trees, she said, and you could pick roses from our dining room window.
She showed me where they had the cannons. She also talked about how they had beautiful chandeliers at the time. They had places for dances.
Dances, a bowling alley, even a bakery. Dahl's granddaughters want to see the fort taken care of again, just like their great-great-grandpa did more than 100 years ago.
Historically, I want to see it preserved for the historical sake of it. Then I'd like to see it have some really special personal touches of my grandmother and her family. And if we're letting it go, what does Portland represent?
Dahl died in 1996, but it was clear how she felt about fixing the fort. There's nothing I'd like to see more than the fort being developed and used again, she said. It's a fine idea. In Portland, Jana Barnello.
The Friends of Fort Gorges plans to honor Lyda Dahl in the coming months. They recently acquired this boat to help them get back and forth to the island. It was donated earlier this year by a historical preservation engineer from New Hampshire. And the Friends group tell us they've decided on a name, Lyda. We turn now to some of the politics of Fort Gorges. It's actually owned by the city of Portland, but to some extent, the city's hands are tied about doing anything out here. We sent Lexi O'Connor to find out why.
I notice it every morning. I come out here walking my dog, and it's a great sight to see.
It's in everyone's photographs, and it's where the sun rises, right behind the fort, and I think it's beautiful.
There's no denying the fort in the center of Portland's harbor is a centerpiece to Portland's views.
It's just a jewel within the middle of Portland Harbor that people can't access at this point.
That's the problem. Portland Mayor Michael Brennan says the fort has enormous tourist potential, but no one can go there with the way it is now.
It's not very accessible to the public because docking is pretty much non-existent, and there are parts of the fort that probably are not that safe.
While Mayor Brennan recognizes this, he says there's little the city can do.
Obviously, we have a lot of other pressing needs within the city, and right now we're focused on any number of capital improvements. We got schools that we need to build and renovate.
Without the money to add Fort Gorges to the city's budget, Portland is now looking into federal funding for the fort. Mayor Brennan hopes that money, combined with any private money raised, will make Fort Gorges a destination not just for people here in Maine, but around the world.
Been all up and down the coast, and it's one of a kind.
One whose needs are starting to be recognized. The Army Corps of Engineers will soon start installing gates in hazardous areas of the fort. While Mayor Brennan says it's a good start, there's still a lot more that needs to be done to keep Portland's harbor's fort in the picture.
I mean, it's in the middle of Portland Harbor, and you get a view that's hard to get anyplace else in the city of Portland or even on the islands.
In Portland, Lexi O'Connor, CBS 13 News.
Coming up, a call for help. 3 things needed to get the restoration project off the ground and how you can get involved.
You're watching Fox 23's Saving Fort Gorges, sponsored by the Porthole Restaurant.
Welcome back. One of the things you begin to notice when you're out here is the acoustics. These archways carry the voice of a single person, so you can only imagine what it must have sounded like with dozens of men and the firing off of rifles. This past summer, Portland Paddle hosted a concert out here, and one of the suggestions by the Friends group to help raise money is to hold theater performances. It's certainly a perfect stage. As we mentioned, to make this all happen, it's going to take the entire community and some large donations. The Friends of Fort Gorges needs to fund their master plan. Throughout the next year, the group will seek volunteers, input from the community, and most importantly, monetary donations.
We have architects, we have engineers, we have a highly skilled master planner that's overseeing this process, and they need to be paid. My biggest concern is that we don't fund this master plan, because if we can't fund the master plan, the process won't move forward.
We have more information on how you can help move this project forward on our website at WGME.com. Thank you for watching our Fort Gorges special. I'm Charlie Lopresti for Fox 23.